Right now, let's talk to, once again, Rear Admiral Dr Chris Parry, who's a former Royal Navy commander. Good morning to you, Chris.
Yeah, good morning.
Good morning. Well, we spoke to you on Monday. We've spoken to you every day this week. I mean, because this story is just gripping the nation, gripping the world. You, on day one, you said you thought the chances of rescue, given even the lapse of time we'd already had over 24 hours, made it very, very unlikely. It's getting more and more unlikely. The US Coast Guard giving this exact time, this 12:08 time, UK time today, is when they believe the oxygen supply will run out. What did you make of that?
Julia, it's over. There's no way we're going to rescue these people. The 96-hour figure is an absolute extreme figure for, really squeezing out the air to the last moment. Even if we located that submersible now, we couldn't actually get it to the surface in 4 hours.
And that's the key thing, isn't it? They've got these, all these, high-tech vehicles. This Victor 6000, it can go down to 20,000 feet. You've got to, even if they found the submersible to right this moment at 8:11 in the morning, you think they wouldn't have a chance of getting it out in time for the oxygen if it did manage to last 96 hours?
No, and once you get it to the surface, you've got to undo 17 bolts to get the hatch open as well. So, there's all sorts of things, I'm afraid, militating against this. Just to be clear, Julia, the thing that will get the thing up to the surface is actually an American system called Curve 21. It's an underwater sort of multi sort of purpose underwater vehicle, and it's attached to a deep salvage system. The Americans in the last 4 years have actually recovered 2 aircraft from nearly 19,000 feet in the Philippine Sea, and that's what will be used to actually bring it up. The French system is just a very sophisticated sort of surveillance system.
Right. But it's the American system that they've got on board. So the key thing about this is being able to actually latch onto the sub. And this is the big concern, wasn't it? That, even if they found the sub, say it was easily to be found on the Titanic wreck, which, of course, you were saying even on Monday, searching for a needle in the haystack, but in the dark, blindfold, and as someone else has pointed out, since a moving haystack, because we've got very strong currents, strong, storms overhead as well. The conditions for searching have not been good. But, everything's in the pitch dark. This is a huge site, and with those currents, and if they've lost power, it may well be that they could be pretty much anywhere in that period, that space. But actually, whether they're trapped perhaps on the wreckage or another wreck in the vicinity, or if the hull is damaged of this 21-foot tiny sort of tin can, effectively not even made of tin, then that just makes it even more difficult. But the idea would be send a vehicle down, locate it, send a vehicle down, attach this cable, and then winch it up to the surface. That is not just the best hope, that's the only hope.
Yeah, they're going to have to wrap it around it because there's no winching mechanism, to latch onto. There's no hooking or anything. People haven't thought about that.
Yeah, that's kind of a worry, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, but I'm afraid one of the big problems with this throughout, and it's always the case when I've been involved in search and rescue, you get into optimism bias. I mean, this banging sound, I've said right from the moment, I've used sonar buoys. The fact of life is you can tell. I mean, how on earth do you bang from the inside of a carbon fibre tube? It's ludicrous. And what they've done is diverted the resources to this totally spurious sound.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid it's a bit like, during the Yorkshire Ripper inquiry, they got this tape and all the resources were focused on that.
Yeah. But I suppose if you've got nothing else to focus on, that's understandable.
Well, no, I mean, I think there's a more sensible way. The thing was going down to the Titanic, so you assume that's where it was heading for. That's where it starts, and you then expand out from that. Frankly, there's been nothing to go on. And I'm afraid people have been trying to maintain hope, trying to maintain morale. If we're being strictly logical, the only thing that seems to have happened is on their descent, they had a catastrophic failure. It stopped sending out its sort of routine signal every 15 minutes. And I'm afraid to say we've been doing the best we can. Everybody has, trying to look for this.
Yeah.
But we're not going to find it, I don't think.
Well, they said very clearly, the Coast Guard rescue coordinator, that this is still a rescue mission. They're treating it as that, not a recovery of bodies mission, effectively, which is what many people fear. Again, there's a 19-year-old down there. You've got to have hope against hope. But this is the key thing. There are so many other things that could happen before the oxygen does run out. Hypothermia, it's freezing cold down there. They're not able to move to keep warm, and that would use more oxygen up as well. Big concern also, I think they're looking at the inside, that there isn't what's called a scrubber available to remove carbon dioxide from the air. You know, people breathe in the oxygen and then the carbon dioxide, and actually concerns that actually people would realistically be unconscious by now. And especially they've run out of food, limited water supplies. You can't last more than 3 days without water. We in cramped conditions, 5 grown men. You know, the hopes, you know, even if they could be found, are pretty slim of them still being alive, but certainly not really conscious at this current time.
Well, we don't know, Julia. We don't know nothing. I mean, one thing that surprised me is we haven't had any data from the company that's actually running this thing. You know, I'd like to know how much oxygen they've got, but nobody's talking. And one of the biggest things that I would like to ask in any subsequent inquiry is, why did you take 8 hours before you actually raised the alarm? I think I know why.
Why?
It's because on previous missions, things have gone wrong, and the thing has bobbed up as expected after going around the Titanic a couple of times.
And it was an 8-hour journey, so they figured, oh, well, we'll give them a bit of time, and then and they come back up and everything's okay. But we know that everyone who's been on one of these missions, this wasn't the first, there has been something that's gone wrong. It is extraordinary, the lack of sort of, you know, fail-safe devices. You know, if I were going to pay, let alone do it for free, but pay $250,000 and take my teenage son with me, I go, okay, so what happens if we lose power? Well, this is what happens. And what happens if, you know, this happens? Or what happens if this happens? There doesn't seem to have been any allowance for anything going wrong at all.
Well, I'm afraid to say there's been some very good or very bad sales technique here. And it must go along the lines of, look, we've got our most experienced pilot. I'm going down in it. So what could go wrong? This is a totally unregulated area.
Yeah.
This is essentially the equivalent of a kit car made in a shed at the end of the garden. And you're putting a lot of trust in this guy that his technology works. I mean, there's been questions about this particular vehicle for the last 5 years. It was actually restricted to 3,000 meters 4 years ago. It hasn't had, as far as I see, a certification. And as you know, Julia, we talked about this on Monday, when you go in it, you actually sign away any rights to sue them for emotional damage, injury or death.
Yeah, 3 times is death mentioned on that waiver form. Are you, look, as someone, you were, Royal Navy commander, well, look, we know in the military, no man left behind, and you go to retrieve bodies and take risks, and it's about, being there and looking after your comrades in arms. Is there any, do you have any anger? Do you have any thoughts on the decision of these people? They've gone to sea in what appears to not being a seaworthy vessel, without enough safety mechanisms in the event, not raised the concern, and yet there is this massive operation involving the Coast Guard, involving the Royal Navy offering advice, all these private other organisations trying to get involved to try and help, and there could be a risk to life of those trying to rescue these men. Do you think that it was wrong of them, and that there should have been more regulation to stop them doing something which could have put other people's lives at risk?
Yeah, absolutely, Julia. You expect the flag state of the support ship, for example, the Polar Prince, to have actually imposed some limitations. I think that will be what will come out of this, is essentially that. But I spent my life, flying. We've picked up people who go down to the sea in very dodgy ships, go out in all sorts of conditions. Yeah. That's our duty. That's what we do it for. And it's very satisfying when you can bring people back. But you do get stupid people. I remember we rescued a girl on a lilo off St Ives, a mile offshore, back in the 1980s, took her back to Cold Rose, and a week later, the parents sent us a bill for the lilo, which we didn't pick up.
That's extraordinary. Good Lord, I'd be taking you out for the biggest slap-up meal to say thank you for keeping my daughter alive. I mean, this is an extraordinary thing. People... I just think, and again, even these people, they're experts, underwater, they're adventurers. Hamish Harding had been, he'd been into space. The people don't realize, the sea, the oceans, the deep ocean, is as dangerous as going into space. And yet, it seems to be something any sort of amateur can try.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I always had in mind when I was at sea, all those years, Julia, is the sea is always out to get you.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many precautions you take, it'll find a way of doing you if you just drop your guard once. And if you go down to 4 kilometres, everything's stacked against you. Yeah. Everything has to go right every time. And I'm afraid to say, in this sector right now, people are taking chances with their lives and other people's lives, and we need to get a grip on it, because it's criminal, frankly.